The knock came just after midnight, 3 heavy strikes against a door that had not been fixed properly since the landlord promised to repair it 4 months ago. Aaliyah Monroe sat up on her second-hand mattress, heart slamming against her ribs, the peeling ceiling of her studio apartment barely visible in the dark. She had exactly $43 in her checking account, and a rent notice taped to her refrigerator that she had been avoiding reading twice a day for the past week. Nobody good knocked on doors at midnight in this building. She had moved into this apartment 2 years earlier, back when the neighborhood still felt survivable and the building's management still occasionally answered the phone. Since then, the landlord had sold to a company that existed, as far as she could tell, only on paper, and repairs had slowed to the point of near non-existence. She had learned to live around the building's failures the way she had learned to live around most things in her life, quietly, efficiently, without complaint, because complaint rarely changed anything and always cost more energy than she had spare to give it. Every month felt like a small negotiation with disaster. Rent stretched thin against a paycheck that covered the essentials and nothing beyond them, and she had grown practiced at not thinking too far past the next 30 days. She crossed the small apartment barefoot. Stepping around the bucket, she kept beneath the leak in the corner, and checked the peephole with the particular caution of a woman who had learned, over 21 years, exactly how dangerous the world could be to someone with no money and no one watching her back. Kazama-rin stood in the hallway, swaying slightly, his charcoal suit jacket hanging open, his tie loosened to the point of nearly falling free entirely. Aaliyah's breath caught somewhere in her throat. She had worked as his personal assistant for 6 months now, long enough to understand exactly who he was beneath the composed, controlled exterior he wore into every boardroom and every meeting that mattered. She had never once seen him like this. She had never imagined she would. She opened the door only partway, the chain still latched, though the gesture felt almost absurd given who stood on the other side of it. "Mr. Kazama," she said. "It's after midnight. Is something wrong?" "Run," he said, his voice slurred just enough to confirm what the swang had already told her. "Call me Ren. You've worked for me 6 months, Aaliyah. I think we're past the surnames." She had never heard him say her first name before. Not once. In 6 months of drafting his correspondence, managing his schedule, standing 3 steps behind him in rooms full of men who spoke about violence the way other people spoke about weather. The sound of it in his mouth did something strange to her chest that she did not have time to examine properly. "You're drunk," she said, unlatching the chain despite every instinct telling her this was a mistake she would regret. "How did you even find my address?" "I have your employment file," Ren said, stepping through the doorway without invitation, his cologne, cedar and something darker beneath it, filling the cramped space of her apartment immediately. "I have always had your address. I have simply never had a reason to use it before tonight." Aaliyah stepped back to let him pass fully into the room, uncertain whether the gesture qualified as hospitality or simple resignation to the fact that turning away a man like Kazama-rin was rarely a genuine option, drunk or otherwise. Aaliyah closed the door behind him, glancing instinctively toward the window, toward the fire escape, cataloging exits the way 6 months of proximity to his world had trained her to. "Why tonight?" she asked. "What happened?" Ren did not answer immediately. He looked around her apartment instead, the peeling paint, the bucket in the corner, the single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling fixture, and something in his expression shifted, unreadable, though not unkind. "This is where you live," he said quietly. "This is where I send my most important correspondence, and this is what waits for you when you go home at night." "It's temporary," Aaliyah said, defensive despite herself.
"I'm savin'."
"It's fine." "It is not fine," Ren said, and something sharp cut through the slur in his voice for just a moment, gone as quickly as it appeared. "I pay competitive salaries. I do not understand how my personal assistant lives in a building with buckets catching rainwater from the ceiling." "Because you pay competitive salaries to people who don't also send half of every paycheck to a mother in Cleveland with medical bills she can't cover," Aaliyah said, and then stopped herself, appalled at how easily the words had slipped out, appalled further that she'd said them to a man capable of ending her employment, or considerably worse, with a single phone call. Ren studied her for a long moment, something working behind his dark, unfocused eyes despite the alcohol clearly dulling most of his usual precision. "You've never told me that," he said. "You've never asked," Aaliyah said. "You pay me. You don't need to know why I need the money." "I should have asked," Rin said, and the admission seemed to cost him something, even drunk, even at midnight in a stranger's falling-apart apartment. "I have failed to notice things I should have noticed a long time ago, Aaliyah. Tonight reminded me of exactly how much I have let myself stop noticing." She crossed her arms, uncertain what to do with a version of her employer she had never encountered before, stripped of the careful composure that usually made him unreadable in every room he entered. "What happened tonight, Rin?" she asked again, softer this time. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer at all, standing in the middle of her small apartment with the particular stillness of a man carrying something heavy he had not decided whether to set down. "I lost someone tonight," he said finally. "Not to violence. To time, and to a decision I made 8 years ago that I have never stopped regretting." "Who?" Aaliyah asked, though something in his tone told her the answer mattered considerably more than idle curiosity. "Her name was Yuki," Rin said. "She worked for my organization the same way you do now, though her role involved considerably more risk than yours does. I loved her, in the specific, complicated way men in my position are rarely permitted to love anyone. A rival faction discovered that attachment and used it against me. She died protecting information she should never have been asked to carry in the first place. I received the news of her death 8 years ago tonight, on this exact date, and I have spent every anniversary since drinking alone in my office until I no longer trust myself to drive home." The confession landed with a weight Aaliyah had not expected, unraveling months of careful, professional distance in a single admission delivered by a man too drunk to filter himself the way he normally would have. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it fully, though she understood the words were inadequate against grief that specific and that old. "I did not come here for sympathy," Rin said. "I am not entirely certain why I came here at all, except that somewhere in the last hour, driving without any clear destination, I found myself outside your building instead of my own, and I could not make myself leave." Aaliyah felt something complicated rise in her chest, caught between the professional wisdom that told her this entire situation was a catastrophic mistake and something else entirely, something that had been building quietly across 6 months of watching this man command every room he entered while somehow, simultaneously, seeming utterly alone in all of them. "You should sit down," she said finally, gesturing toward the single chair at her small kitchen table, the only seating her apartment offered besides the mattress on the floor. "You're not driving anywhere else tonight." Rin lowered himself into the chair with less than his usual precision, the alcohol clearly working against the careful control she had never once seen fail him in 6 months of employment. "You're taking care of me," he observed, something almost bewildered in his voice, as though the concept itself were unfamiliar territory rather than simple kindness. "Someone should," Aaliyah said. "You clearly don't do it for yourself." Something shifted in his expression, gratitude tangled with an old, familiar exhaustion. "I have people paid to protect me," he said. "I do not have people who simply want it." "I'm not paid for this," Aaliyah said quietly. "Just so we're clear." "I know," Rin said. "That is precisely why it matters." She made him water instead of anything stronger, setting the chipped glass down in front of him with more care than the glass itself deserved, and sat across the small table, watching him in a silence that felt considerably less uncomfortable than she expected it to. "Why did you tell me about Yuki?" she asked eventually. "You could have said nothing. Slept it off in your car." "I never would have known." "Because you would have found out eventually," Rin said. "Everyone in my organization who stays long enough learns about Yuki. I would rather you hear it from me, tonight, honestly, than piece it together later from rumor and speculation the way most people do." "That's not the only reason," Aaliyah said, watching him carefully. Something almost like a smile moved at the corner of his mouth, tired and unguarded in a way she had never seen from him. "No," he admitted. "It is not." The silence between them stretched, charged now in a way it had not been minutes earlier, and Aaliyah found herself acutely aware of the small distance separating their 2 chairs, the particular quality of his attention now that alcohol had stripped away the careful composure he usually wore like a second suit. "You should go home," she said finally, though the words came out less certain than she intended. "Sleep this off properly. We can talk about whatever this is tomorrow, when you're not drunk and grieving at the same time." "Is that what you want?" Rin asked. "For me to leave?" Aaliyah hesitated, torn between the practical wisdom that told her this entire night was a mistake unfolding in slow motion, and something considerably more honest that had been building for months beneath the surface of every professional interaction between them. "I want you to be safe," she said carefully. "And I want you to remember whatever happens tonight and not regret it in the morning simply because you were drunk when it happened." "I will remember everything," Rin said. "I am not so drunk that I will forget this conversation, Aaliyah. I promise you that." She believed him, somehow, despite every reason not to, and she rose from the table to retrieve the single blanket she owned, folding it over the back of the couch cushion she intended to make into a makeshift bed on her own floor. "You can have the mattress," she said. "I'll sleep on the couch cushion." "I will sleep on the floor," Rin said, rising unsteadily. "I did not come here to displace you from your own bed." "You're drunk and grieving," Aaliyah said. "Take the mattress." "This isn't a negotiation, Ren." Something in the way she said his name, firm, unhesitating, seemed to catch him off guard entirely, and he studied her for a long moment before finally nodding, conceding the point with none of the authority he usually carried into every disagreement. He was asleep within minutes, the exhaustion and alcohol finally overtaking him fully, and Aaliyah sat awake on the narrow couch cushion for a long while afterward, listening to his breathing even out in the dark, turning over everything he had told her, everything she had not expected to learn about the man she had spent 6 months assisting without ever truly seeing. He left before dawn, before she had fully woken, though she found a note on her kitchen table when she finally rose, written in the same precise handwriting he used for every memo and correspondence she had ever typed on his behalf. "Thank you," it read, "for the water and the mattress, and for not asking me to explain myself more than I was capable of explaining. I will see you at the office."
Dang.
She carried the note with her to work that morning, tucked into her coat pocket like something fragile she did not yet know how to categorize, and spent the entire commute rehearsing exactly how professional and unaffected she intended to be when she saw him again. The professionalism lasted exactly as long as it took him to look at her. Once, across the length of his office, his expression carrying none of the drunken vulnerability from the night before but all of the weight that had produced it. "Aaliyah," he said, using her given name in front of his lieutenants for the first time, and she watched 2 of the men exchange a glance that told her clearly this was not normal. This was not something Kazama Ren did without reason. "Stay after the meeting. We need to discuss something." The meeting itself proceeded with the same clipped efficiency she had grown accustomed to over 6 months, when discussing shipping routes and territory disputes with a precision that gave no indication whatsoever of the man who had sat drunk and grieving at her kitchen table 12 hours earlier. It was only once his lieutenants filed out, leaving the 2 of them alone in his office, that his composure cracked slightly at the edges. "I owe you an explanation," he said, "for last night. And an apology for putting you in a position that was neither fair nor appropriate given the nature of our professional relationship." "You don't owe me an apology," Aaliyah said. "You were grieving. I helped a person who needed help." "That's not something that requires an apology, Ren, whatever your lieutenants might think if they knew the full story. It requires acknowledgement at the very least," he said. "You saw a version of me that almost no one alive has been permitted to see. I would like to understand why that does not frighten you the way it should." Aaliyah considered the question carefully, aware of how much weight rested behind it. "Because you didn't hurt me," she said. "You showed me something honest instead. I've spent my whole life around people who hide everything that might make them look weak. You didn't do that last night. That's not frightening. That's just rare." Something shifted in his expression. The same recalibration she had witnessed happen slowly across 6 months of quiet observation, now accelerating into something considerably more immediate. "I have not been entirely honest with you about something else," Ren said. "Your presence in my life has stopped being purely professional for me for some time now. I did not intend to reveal that last night, drunk, in a moment I could not fully control. I would have preferred to tell you properly, sober, with the full weight of the admission intact. The confession landed in the quiet office with a gravity that made Aaliyah's pulse tick up despite herself, though she did not look away from him, did not retreat into the safety of professional distance the way 6 months of careful boundaries might have suggested she should. I've known for a while, she admitted, about how you look at me sometimes, when you think I'm not paying attention. And you said nothing, Rin said. Because I work for you, Aaliyah said. Because saying something felt like the kind of complication I couldn't afford, financially or otherwise. I need this job, Ren. I can't lose it over feelings that might not survive contact with reality. I would never let this cost you your position, Ren said, something fierce entering his voice for the first time since she'd known him. Whatever happens between us, your employment and your security remain entirely separate from it. I need you to understand that clearly, Aaliyah, regardless of anything else that unfolds between us. She studied him, searching for the catch she had learned, through years of careful poverty, to expect from men who offered sudden, unearned generosity. She found, to her genuine surprise, that she could not locate one, and that unsettled her considerably more than if she had. It was during this same conversation that Rin told her, more fully than he had managed the night before, about the 8 years since Yuki's death, the way he had rebuilt his organization's security protocols entirely around preventing another loss like her, the way every decision about who worked closely with him had been shaped, quietly, by a fear he had never once spoken aloud to another living person until the previous midnight. I made certain, after she died, that no one else would ever be permitted close enough to become a liability the way she had, he said. I kept every assistant, every advisor, every lieutenant at a careful, professional distance for 8 years. And then you arrived, unassuming, sharper than you let anyone see, and I found the distance I had built for myself dissolving before I had fully decided to let it. That sounds like something you should have told me a long time before last night, Aaliyah said. Perhaps, Rin said, though I suspect I needed the alcohol to say it at all. Some truths require a person to be slightly less themselves before they can finally speak them honestly. In the days that followed, something quiet and unspoken settled into a new rhythm between them, small and easily overlooked by anyone not paying close attention. He began finding reasons to walk past her desk more often than his schedule strictly required. She began noticing, with a kind of wary honesty she had not allowed herself before, how differently he spoke to her than to anyone else in the building, the particular patience he reserved only for her questions, the way his voice softened by some small, involuntary degree whenever he said her name. She mentioned this shift, eventually, to her sister over a phone call one evening, careful to keep the details vague enough to protect them both. There's someone at work, she admitted. Complicated. Dangerous, probably, in ways I'm still figuring out. But he sees me. Actually sees me. That's rarer than it should be. Just be careful, her sister said. Complicated men either become the best thing that ever happened to you, or the reason you have to start over somewhere new. Aaliyah thought about that warning more than she wanted to admit in the days that followed, weighing it against everything Ren had shown her, the vulnerability at her kitchen table, the honesty about Yuki, the careful, deliberate way he had begun treating her as something considerably more than an assistant without ever once overstepping a boundary she hadn't invited him across. There was a moment, 4 days after the night at her apartment, that Aaliyah would return to often in the weeks that followed, turning it over in her memory the way she turned over anything that mattered. She had stayed late again, finishing a report Ren needed for a meeting the following morning, and he had come to find her at her desk rather than simply waiting for the document to appear on his own. You don't need to stay this late, he said, leaning against the doorframe of her small office, his tie finally loosened after a long day of meetings, though nothing about his posture carried the vulnerability of that first midnight visit. I don't mind, Aaliyah said, not looking up from her screen. The quiet helps me think. Or you're avoiding going home to an apartment with a bucket in the corner, Ren said. She did look up at that, something sharp and defensive rising before she caught the look on his face, not mockery, but genuine concern threaded through careful humor. Maybe a little of both, she admitted. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her desk, closer than strict professionalism would have called for, close enough that she caught the same cedar note in his cologne she had noticed that first night, close enough that the air between them seemed to thin considerably. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the silence stretching into something charged rather than uncomfortable. "I keep thinking about what you said," Ren said finally. "About people hiding everything that might make them look weak. I've spent most of my adult life ensuring no one ever saw anything but strength. It is exhausting, Aaliyah, in ways I did not permit myself to acknowledge until recently." "You don't have to hide it with me," she said quietly. "I've already seen you at your worst. Nothing you show me now is going to change what I already know." Something in his expression shifted, and for a moment neither of them looked away, the distance between his hand resting on the desk and hers on the keyboard suddenly feeling like the only thing in the room that mattered. He did not close that distance. She did not close it either. But something passed between them in that silence, an acknowledgement neither of them was ready to name aloud, and when he finally rose and said goodnight, his voice carried a warmth she had not heard from him in any of their 6 months of purely professional exchanges. She thought about that moment for days afterward, the particular weight of a silence that said considerably more than words might have managed, and she understood, turning it over again and again, that whatever was building between them had already moved past the point where either of them could pretend it was purely professional. The danger arrived 3 days later, arriving from a direction neither of them expected. Aaliyah was working late at the office, finishing correspondence Ren had asked her to draft, when one of his lieutenants, a broad-shouldered man named Sato Takashi, whom she had always found quietly unsettling, appeared in the doorway with an expression that made her instincts sharpen immediately. "Miss Monroe," Sato said, "Mr. Kazama needs you to come with me. There's been a situation involving a rival faction, and your safety may be compromised given your proximity to him these last few days." Aaliyah's blood ran cold, every warning she had ever half heard about the dangerous edges of Ren's world rising to the surface at once. "What kind of situation?" she asked, rising from her desk but keeping her phone gripped tightly in one hand. "The Hoshino faction has learned about Mr. Kazama's personal interest in you," Sato said. "They believe leveraging you against him is worth the considerable risk. He asked me to bring you somewhere secure before they act on that belief." She chose to trust the specificity of the warning, the particular tension in Sato's voice that she recognized as genuine even from a man she had never fully trusted, and followed him toward a waiting car, though she remained alert to every shift in the environment around her, ready to act the moment anything felt wrong. The car delivered her 20 minutes later to a private property on the city's edge, where Ren met her at the entrance himself, his usual composure fractured visibly at the edges, by genuine fear rather than alcohol this time. "You're safe," he said, the relief in his voice raw and unguarded. "I should never have allowed anyone to know how much you matter to me. That knowledge alone has made you a target in a way I failed to anticipate." "Then tell me what you intend to do about it," Aaliyah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Don't just apologize. Fix it." Something shifted in his expression, approval threading through the fear still visible in his features. "I intend to end the Hoshino threat directly," he said. "Tonight. But it means you cannot simply return to your ordinary life and pretend none of this happened. If you remain near me while this resolves, it must be a choice you make with complete understanding of what it costs." "I already made that choice," Aaliyah said, "the night I let you sleep on my mattress instead of turning you away at the door." The confrontation came faster than either of them expected. The property's security system flickered and failed entirely, plunging the room into darkness broken only by moonlight through tall windows. Ren was on his feet immediately, positioning himself between Aaliyah and the door with a fluid, unhesitating motion that told her exactly how many times he had done this before. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice utterly flat, utterly controlled, though the tension in his frame told her precisely how seriously he was taking the threat. The door burst open, and 2 armed men entered, their eyes fixing on Aaliyah with a coldness that made her stomach twist violently. "You should have kept your interests private, Kazama," the taller one said. "This one didn't need to become part of it." "She is part of it now," Ren said, stepping fully between them, his voice carrying a lethal quiet Aaliyah had never heard from him before. which means you will have to go through me first. The taller man's weapon wavered slightly, hesitation flickering across his face, and Aaliyah recognized instantly that this was the only opening they were likely to get. She grabbed the heavy ceramic vase from the table beside her, the only object within reach, and threw it hard toward the man's gun arm the instant his attention shifted fully toward Ren. The vase connected solidly, knocking the weapon loose a half-second before Ren closed the remaining distance, disarming both men with an economical, lethal precision that left no room for hesitation. It was over within seconds, the intruder subdued on the floor, the entire confrontation resolved with a speed that left Aaliyah's hands shaking with delayed shock. Ren looked at her afterward with something that was not quite surprise and not quite gratitude, a full recalibration of everything he had assumed about the woman standing in his property. "You could have stayed back," he said. "You could have hidden and let me handle them." "I know," Aaliyah said, her voice unsteady now that the danger had passed. "I chose to help anyway." "Why?" "Because I've spent my whole life being the person nobody expected to fight back," she said, "and I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to stop being her the one night it actually mattered." Something in Ren's carefully guarded expression finally broke entirely, the controlled stillness cracking to reveal the full depth of what lay beneath it. His men arrived to remove the intruders, though neither of them looked away from each other during the exchange, the weight of everything unspoken between them finally settling into something neither could pretend away any longer. "I told myself, that first morning after I left her apartment, that I would keep things professional between us," Ren said quietly, once the room had cleared. "I have been failing at that promise since roughly the moment I made it." "I noticed," Aaliyah said, a faint, exhausted smile finally breaking through the adrenaline still coursing through her. "You're not exactly subtle once the composure slips." "No," he admitted. "Apparently I am not." In the days that followed, the Hoshino threat dissolved with the particular finality that men in Ren's world dealt in, details Aaliyah did not ask for and suspected she did not want. Her financial situation shifted too, gradually, Ren insisting on a salary adjustment that reflected her actual value to his organization rather than the modest wage she had accepted out of desperation 6 months earlier, an adjustment she accepted only once she was certain it came from respect rather than guilt. There were quieter transitions too, less visible but no less significant. The landlord who had ignored her repair requests for months suddenly found reason to fix the leaking ceiling within days, though Aaliyah suspected, without ever asking directly, that the sudden efficiency had considerably less to do with tenant relations and considerably more to do with a phone call she was never meant to know about. Sato Takashi, who had once unsettled her simply by existing in her periphery, began treating her with a wary, deliberate respect that told her clearly the rest of Ren's organization understood exactly what her presence in his life now meant, whether or not either of them had said the words aloud yet. She called her sister again a week after the confrontation, though she told the fuller version this time, the danger and the rescue and the ceramic vase she had thrown with more precision than she'd known she possessed. Her sister was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "You could have died," her sister said finally. "Doesn't that scare you enough to walk away?" "It should," Aaliyah admitted. "But it doesn't. I've spent my whole life being careful, being small, being the version of myself that didn't take up too much space or ask for too much. For the first time, someone sees exactly how much I'm capable of and doesn't ask me to shrink it. I'm not walking away from that because it's dangerous. Everything worth having has been dangerous for people like us." "Mama would have said the same thing about Dad, back before things went bad," her sister said quietly. "I just want you to be careful, not blind." "I'm not blind," Aaliyah said. "I've seen exactly what this world looks like up close now, the danger and the ugliness and the cost of it. I'm choosing it anyway, with my eyes wide open. That's different from walking into it not knowing what I was getting." Her sister did not have an answer for that, and Aaliyah did not need one. She understood, hanging up the phone that evening, that she had already made her choice long before the conversation. Somewhere between the mattress she'd offered a drunk and grieving stranger and the ceramic vase she'd thrown without hesitation to protect him. It was weeks later, on an ordinary evening when Rin found her at her small kitchen table again, this time sober, deliberate, entirely himself, that he finally set down the small bag he was carrying and studied her with the same careful attention he had shown her the night everything between them had changed. "I owe you a proper acknowledgement," he said. "Not simply an apology for how this began, but a recognition of what you are to me now, which I have avoided naming directly for longer than either of us should have tolerated." "That sounds like a confession, Ren," Aaliyah said, using his given name without hesitation now, watching something warm and unguarded pass behind his dark eyes at the sound of it. "It is," he said. "I do not offer them easily. Consider this one an event." He did not say the word love. He did not need to. He set the bag down on her small table instead, revealing groceries enough to fill her nearly empty refrigerator, an image far more honest than any declaration could have offered, proof that he had noticed, finally and completely, exactly what her life had lacked before he had walked into it. She unpacked the bag slowly, item by item, aware of him watching her from across the small table with an attention that felt considerably different now than it had that first drunken midnight, deliberate instead of desperate, certain instead of grieving. There was rice and vegetables she recognized, and a few things she didn't, ingredients she suspected he had chosen with more care than the gesture strictly required. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, though her voice carried none of the defensiveness it might have carried 6 months earlier. "I wanted to," Rin said simply. "There is very little in my life I am permitted to want plainly, without calculation attached to it. This is one of the few things I have allowed myself to want exactly as simply as it appears." Aaliyah understood, sitting across from him in her small, imperfect kitchen, that some truths did not require grand pronouncements, only the daily, deliberate choice to remain exactly where you had decided to stand, mattress and all, in an apartment that had once been a place to survive and had somehow, gradually, become something closer to home.